Hello everyone, how are you doing? Welcome back to tapaScript, where you learn things conceptually and fundamentally. Today we are going to do some project. We are going to do some hands-on together. So we'll be building one inventory item list using React's useReducer. We'll be using JSON-server to mock an API, and we'll be using Axios for data fetching. On top of that, we'll be using Tailwind CSS to do some styling and all other stuff. But this is not just building project. This is also about explaining certain internals of thing as and when we build stuff. So it may sound like a beginner friendly video, which it is, but along with that also you get to know what is happening in the background, right? So the explanation of it as well. If you like it, please like and share. And please subscribe to this channel because it's going to make me super happy. All right, so without any further delay, let's get started. To get started, first we will create a project, and the project will be based on Tailwind and Vite along with React. So for that, I already have a template repository. I can go there and create a new repository, give this repository a name, say inventory list, and maybe a description, something like this, and then go ahead and create this repository. As the repository has been created, I can very well go ahead and clone this repository and start setting up my things. So in case you want to get started with a React project that has Vite and Tailwind already configured, you can always do it from this particular project, which is there on my GitHub. I've also shared the link of it in the description of this video. And you can also find another video that explains how to create such a repository. All right, so let's clone and start setting up the things. Let's clone this guy. All right, so it's cloned. Let's change the directory to the project directory, and let us do yarn so that all the dependencies get installed, and let's do yarn dev so that we run this project locally. Okay, the project is running on localhost 5173. Let's go to the browser and see it. All right, so we see the project is running locally, and it says welcome to Vite with Tailwind CSS and React, because that's the basic coding done on the template repository from where we have created our own repository. So we are going to go and start changing our code and start making this inventory list using useReducer hook and Axios. I have now imported the project into VS Code and opened up the app.jsx file where that particular heading, which you just now have seen on the browser, is being written here. So over here, we are now going to change stuff because we are going to create an inventory list. So the first thing that we are going to do is under src, create a folder called components, and inside components, create a file called inventory list.jsx. Let's create the component structure. So I have a basic component structure for the inventory list component, and first thing I'm going to do is to import inventory list over here in the app.jsx file and knock out everything over here and use inventory list instead. So now this is ready. I'll go to my UI and try to see like inventory list is getting rendered or not. So it means this particular div and this particular text should get rendered at least. So that's my UI, and I can see that inventory list is being rendered. So this means my inventory list component, the basic structure, is working fine. An inventory list will pick up data by making an API call to a server. For the server, we'll use the JSON server so that we can have a server locally, and we will serve some data from JSON server using the JSON as a data store. So first, let's create a JSON server, and for that we have to install JSON server first. Open the command prompt again and then type this command yarn add JSON server. If you're using npm, then it will be npm install. So the JSON server has been installed. I'll go back to the VS Code, and if I go to the package.json file, I can see JSON server is installed over here. With JSON server, we are going to create new API endpoints. On those API endpoints, we will serve some data. And JSON server is the perfect choice if you want to try out certain data locally. So for that, we will be creating a folder called server under src. Inside server, let's create another folder called database. Inside database, let's create a file called data.json. Now inside data.json, we have to give some data to JSON server that it can serve on an API. So for that, let's create a JSON object structure, something like this, that I have copied, and you can also find out in the description of this video the source code link from where you can also copy that JSON file and can start using. So if you look into this, it is merely a standard JSON file where you have a key and the value for this key is an array. So when you run this using JSON server, it is going to create an API endpoint called /itables. On /itables, all these items will be listed. So I have a bunch of itables over here, and if I look into the properties of each of the itables, this is very straightforward. It has ID, picture is nothing but an emoji, it has a name, price, how many are there in the store, and what is the type of this particular item. So this is very standard. So it means that it's going to create an API endpoint called /eatables, and /eatables is going to list out all these items for me. Now to make it happen, we have to run JSON server locally. So for that, I'll go to package.json file and go to script section. Here I'll be adding a new script called start server, and here my script will be JSON -server -watch. Here we have to give the path to the file, the database file, basically data.json file. So that's inside .src/server/database/data.json file. Another way of looking into it would be, if you don't want to keep your server file within the same project where you are writing client, you can very well take out this repository in a separate folder outside of your this project, the project that you have just created. For that, you have to add a package.json file inside the server project, and there you will be writing this script, right? Putting the appropriate path. That's the way also you can actually do it. Maybe in one of the future projects that we'll be building, I will show with client and server keeping separate. Okay, so for now, we are good. Our purpose here is to just to create a local server, and if this is working, we are very much done with it so that we can focus on our client side application. So we'll go back to our command prompt, and here we will do yarn start-server. If you're using npm, use npm run start-server. So as you are seeing, the server has been started and it is running on localhost 3000, and the API that is serving is called http localhost 3000/eatables, because that's the key that we have provided in the data.json file. So let me copy it, go to the browser and open another tab and try this. So if I try this, I can see this is the response that I'm getting, which is there in the data.json file. Now I'm going to utilize this response, and from my client side React code, I'm going to make an API call. Just like exactly how I'll be making an API call that may be running on some other server or maybe on cloud or anywhere. But in this case, only thing matters is that URL through which I am actually contacting that API endpoints, right? For us, it's local. In real life, it may be something which is hosted on some cloud. So fair enough. So our API server is integrated. Now the next thing we are going to focus on doing the UI, but we have to make a network call. Right? For that, we'll be using the library called Axios. Let's install Axios, but before that, let us know what is Axios. So Axios is a library that helps us making XML HTTP request call. It means that it helps us making asynchronous call. We can actually make the call using promises or its sister async await keywords. And while making the call, there are many other facilities and the flexibilities that Axios provides, like you can intercept and request and response. What does it intercepting means? You are making a request, but in between you can actually intervene and do something before the request goes back to server. And again from server, when the response comes back to the client, there also you can intervene or intercept and do something before the response come back to the client. So this kind of thing, then you can transform the request and response data. You can abort a particular request, you can cancel a request. So all these things that you can actually do pretty well with Axios. So if you're already using Fetch API, JavaScript provides it out of the box. It's one of the web API. You can think Axios is just like that. It might have certain extra capabilities for what you might want to consider using it. I could have done the same project using Fetch. So just to introduce Axios to people who are not using it yet, I thought of using Axios for that purpose. So let's go ahead and install Axios. To do that, you can use any of this command. As I'm using yarn, so I'll be copying yarn add Axios, go back to my command prompt. Over here, I'm going to paste it and then install it. Axios has been installed. If I go to my source code now, in the package.json of this, I can find Axios installed successfully. So now I'll be able to use Axios to make an asynchronous call to the API I have just now created using JSON server. So our API is localhost 3000/eatables. Okay, so let's get back to our component file, which is our inventory list. This is where we are going to do all the program. Traditionally in React, we use useState hook to manage the state. But when your application grows and your state management logic become complex, then you have another way of managing state comfortably, which is called using the useReducer hook. useReducer is another hook that React gives us out of the box, just like useState. With that, you can make use of the actions and the dispatcher to make the state management and its logic much more manageable. If you are new to it, I would strongly encourage you to read this particular page that I'm showing on the screen now. The link is also there in the description of this video. Alternatively, I have created an extensive video understanding and explaining useReducer hook and its comparison from useState. You can check it out. That link is also there in this description of this video. So we are going to use useReducer hook to manage the state of this inventory, and we are going to manage the state for getting the inventory details in this video, but we are actually laying out the foundation here that the same can be reused to add an item to the inventory, updating an item in the inventory, or deleting an item from the inventory. We will see that. A few notes to take care over here. If you scroll down on the same page, you will see 2 points have laid out really well. One, it says reducers must be pure. It means that it should be like a pure function. So pure function, as we know, that pure function always provide the same output for the same input. It means there is no side effect exist within the pure function that will really manipulate the output different way for the similar input, right? That's a paradigm in the functional programming itself. Now that is something that we will maintain when you create our reducer. And the second thing is each action describes a single user interaction. So it means if user click on something and that adds something, that fetches something, that create, that update, that delete. So for each of this interaction, we have to create distinct actions. All right. So these are the two things, two paradigm we will keep in mind when we start writing our reducer. So let's go ahead and start writing our reducer. The useReducer hook looks like this. useReducer hook takes two parameters. One is called reducer and initial state, and it returns state and dispatch. But what are these? Let's break them one by one. So the first thing, useReducer is a state management tool or the hook given by React itself. It is little bit better than useState when your state logic is complex. All right. What is reducer? Reducer is a plain old JavaScript function that holds the state change logic. So reducer is the place where we will do all the logic for your state changes based on various different conditions. Apart from that, there will be something called initial state that we initialize our reducer with. We provide the reducer this initial state so that we start with some point, and then based on the instructions and the actions, we can change the state. Now, how this instruction and actions come into picture? The instructions and actions comes into picture through the dispatch method. The dispatch method tells the reducer what to do based on an action. So for example, if I to tell fetch data, the dispatch is going to tell the reducer, hey reducer, you have a fetch data action. Now go ahead and change your logic or put the logic in a way so that you can change the initial state to a state that is required after fetching the data. And finally, the current state value will be returned. So this is all about the useReducer hook, the anatomy of useReducer hook. Now let's go back to our component and utilize this hook to start creating stuff. But before that, we'll be creating the reducer. And while creating the reducer, we'll understand what is there in the reducer, what goes in the reducer, and then in the component, we'll be using this reducer using the useReducer hook. Let us now create the inventory reducer. For that, we'll create a folder called reducers. The folder is required because you may have multiple reducers for your project. For us, it will be one reducer and we'll call it as inventory reducer.js. The reducer is a plain old JavaScript function. We will write that plain old JavaScript function with arrow function. So let's do it const inventory reducer equals to the function. Now the reducer takes two parameters. One is state and another is action. What is state? The state is that this particular inventory state means the inventory data. This is what will be changed and computed based on the action that is supplied to this reducer. Who will supply this action to this reducer? It is dispatcher which will supply this action to the reducer. We'll see that in a while. But for now, we have inventory reducer which takes state and action as parameters. Down here, there are a few things that we want to do. We want to check what kind of action this reducer is getting. And based on the type of that action, it is going to do something. Now I'm talking about actions type. So the action has a type. This particular action type, we can actually define and we can act on it for creating the conditions. So to define action types, I would recommend we will create a folder again called actions. Inside actions, we can create a file called index.js, and here we can define some of this action. So we can say our action is about fetching the inventory data, right? So we can say fetch actions equals some constant we'll create. We'll say progress, then the next one will be success, and the last one will be error. So these are the three actions we have created, and then we will say export fetch actions. Now I have named it very generically called fetch actions. So it means that this particular action can be used for fetching anything, making an API call, which will have possibly three actions. That progress means when the API is making its call is going on, it has not got any data back. Success when it's got the data back. Error if there is an error, right? So to indicate different kind of type of the action, the state of the action, we have defined three properties over here. So now we'll get back to reducer and we import this action at the top. We have imported this action, and here we are going to do few stuff. Here we are going to do the condition. So for the condition, we will do a switch case. So let's do switch and switch on action.type. So it means if the action.type is fetch action.progress, then we'll do something. If the action.type is fetch actions.success, then we do something. If the action.type is fetch action.error, then we do something. Okay, so this is what we are going to do. Now, if you know switch come with case, and here we say fetch actions.progress. So in case of progress, we are going to do something. Okay, we are going to do something for progress. Similarly, we'll write other cases. This will be success, and then the next case would be for error. All right. Now for progress, what would we do for progress? We told that the reducer is the place where the state will be changed and the logic on the state changes will be applied. Those logic is what we are going to tackle here. So when it is progress, this particular action happening, that means we can do something like we can return our state in a way. This is the state, and we say that we assume that inside state there will be an attribute called loading, and we'll just make this loading as true. So this is what for this progress action, the change to the state. So whatever the state that I am receiving, if the action is progress, I am changing the state's loading attribute as true. As simple as that. Then what will be for success? For success, again I'll copy this return so that I don't have to again write. Loading of course will be false. That means data loading is done. So loading will be false. And then we will do items, means the data that we have received is action dot data. Okay, so here I want to say something. So action we know that has a type, and based on the type I am getting this. Along with type, action will also have something called a payload or data. This is the payload or data. So it means that when an action happens, when something is dispatched, we are not only saying, okay, do this, but when time comes, we are also able to send the data to the reducer so that based on that data, we can do the state changes. I hope that you are okay with that and you understood that. So for success case, loading is false, and our items, the data basically is action.data. So from action, what are the data we are getting, that we are populating for the items attribute from the state object. As simple as that. So for error case, what we'll do, again I'm going to copy this and paste it over here. Loading is anyway going to be false. In this case, I may not get data. I will not get data basically because the data has not reached to me because of some error. But instead of that, I will get an error. I'm maintaining an error state in my state object, and I'll get an error like action.error. So I have written all the three things over here, right? I have written all the three things. Now the only thing that is remaining for me is to export this reducer out. So I have this reducer. I'll come at the end, and over I'll do export inventory reducer. So far so good. Now what we have also learned, like when useReducer hook we pass the reducer to the useReducer hook, and along with that we also pass as an initial state. Initial state is to set the reducer with the state that will be working, the structure of the state. By now you actually notice the structure of the state is very straightforward over here. It's an object which has a loading property, which has an items property, and which has got an error property. That is the state structure, right? You identified with that. So I can actually create one more variable called initial state, and then initialize this state with items, loading, and error. And if you look closely, their default values, items with a blank means initially no items, loading is false, and error is null. Now I can export this initial state as well along with the inventory reducer from this particular reducer component. So now my reducer is ready. So if you recall the signature of useReducer, I have to pass the reducer to it, I have to pass the initial state to it, both are ready. So in my component, if I go and import both of them, I can now call the useReducer hook passing these two so that I can get dispatch and state back. So that's the remaining work for me. Now we are back to our inventory list component. So in the inventory list component, I have to use the reducer. So for that, I will import the useReducer hook from React. That's the first thing. After that, I will import my reducer, which is like inventory reducer, and the initial state that I have created from my reducers. That's perfectly done. Okay. Now after this, I need Axios because I will be making an asynchronous call, and we have already discussed like why Axios is required. So I need Axios. As I'll be making the asynchronous call from my component, my React component, I have to handle that side effect. So I'll be using use effect hook as well to handle the side effect. These are the things that I need for now. I am going to get const state comma dispatch equals to useReducer. Here I'll be passing my reducer, which is like event reducer, and the initial state. So this is the exact syntax we have seen, right, when we started discussing about useReducer. So we have useReducer where we have passed the reducer, initial state, getting the state, and dispatch. All right. Now, as I have the state, from state, what are the things I can get? If you see what I initialize the state with, items, loading, and error, these three things. That means after this, I can always extract items, loading, and error. And whenever I am getting this, I'll be getting their current value. So here, the next thing that I'll be doing is const items, loading, and error equals to, I have done the object destructuring here. In case you are new to object destructuring, I have a video created for object destructuring. I have also given the link of that video in this video description. Please go ahead and take a look. All right. So I have this done. The next thing would be I'll be managing my state now. Next thing would be I'll be managing the effect. So with that, I'll be writing use effect, the hook, and everything goes inside this use effect callback. And I want to make this call only for the first time for my application. So I have given the dependency array as blank. Now inside this, I am going to do a lot of stuff. The first thing that I'm going to do is I want to start the loading indicator. That means if I now go to the actions, I want to tell my reducer that I am getting into a progress state. Okay, so my call is progressing state. After that, I will initiate my call using Axios. Once I get back the result, I will turn the state to success. If there is an error, I'll turn the state to error. And while I'm turning the state, I have to dispatch the particular action, means fetch actions.progress, fetch actions.success, fetch actions.error. So it means in the inventory list also, while I'm dispatching, I have to tell about this action. I have to know this action. So for that, I have to also import fetch actions because I'll be using it in a while. So I have done this importing. So first thing is to dispatch for load. So I'll do dispatch, and here I'll be passing my object as action, basically type colon fetch action dot progress. Okay. So this dispatch, whenever it comes here, so this dispatch is dispatching this action which says type is fetch actions dot progress. It means it goes to my reducer straight away. When it comes to this reducer, actions type is progress, so it qualifies over here. That means the state change will be only that loading will become true. You got that, right? So this is what I am doing. After this, I have to initiate this call. So for initiating this call, as it is an asynchronous call, it will be an async method, right? So I'll say const get items equals to async. All right. So here I'll do a try catch so that I can handle the error in case there is an error. So let's handle the error first. Console.error, I'll log the error. And then in case of error, I'll dispatch again. But what I'm going to dispatch with, I'm going to dispatch with the type. The type is of course error. And also the error is err dot the message that I'm getting from there. So this is what I'm dispatching. So in case there is an error, that means I'm always logging into the console.error, and then the dispatch is saying I am fetch actions.error. So if I go to my reducer again, so action will be, the type will be matching now to error. It will come over here. It will make the loading state back to false, and error will be the actions.error. So actions.error is nothing but this particular error message. So far so good. We got this. So if there is an error happen, the state is the current value, right, that I get from the reducer. So that means current items remain blank. The loading became false, but the error is an error message. That's what I get. And this error message, I can take it and put it in my JSX to print the error at any point of time. That's how things are working. So it's always good to know how things works than what you will be doing in code, right? Syntax is important, but first to know is like how things work. Next, I have to work on the success scenarios. So for success scenarios, I'll be doing like let response equals to await, because I'm going to make an Axios call, and I'll be making Axios.get. And here, what is my URL? My URL was localhost 3000/eatables. So that is what was my API URL, API endpoint. So I'll go and come back to my VS Code again, and I'm providing it here. This is what is my async call, and that's why I have to put it as await. After this, I'm going to make some check. I'll tell if response.status, if it is 200 means success. In that case, I'm going to do a dispatch, and this time my dispatch would be type will be success, and along with that I can also pass a data, and that is nothing but response.data. All right. So in this case, what happened? If there is a success response, so for the success response, I am now putting an action whose type is success and the data. So it means it goes back to the reducer again, and in this case it matches this particular type. Here it changed the state as loading is false, and the items become action.data. So this data is nothing but the data that I am actually populating with response.data. So far so good. All right. As we have done with the method, the next thing would be to call this method. So we'll be calling this method over here, get items. Now I think we are all set. So to test it out, before writing any JSX, we will come to the place where we get the item loading an error, and we are going to print them out. Console.log items, comma, loading, comma, error. And we'll go to our UI and try to see whether the value of items is coming or not, or there is an error, what kind of conditions these are. As this service is running, we expect to get the items for sure. Okay, here we get the output. What do we see over here? We see like first the loading state was false. Error is null and it is empty. Then after some time it turns to true, and then after some time I start getting the result, right? This is the result that actually I'm pulling from that particular API. Isn't it awesome? So I made the Axios call, I fetched the data, and through reducer I am actually managing my state. So now the only thing remain over here is to take this data and do certain things to build our JSX. Okay, if you are wondering like why these things are getting printed twice or getting rendered twice, the only reason being that we are running the development mode in the strict mode, and when you run it on the strict mode, it actually happens twice. But if you put it in the production, it will only happen once. So it means it will happen like false, true, and then false. So initially we made it false, then the loading indicator started becoming true, means loading the call is being made. Now call is done. Then after that I got the data, loading indicator become false, and I got null. Okay, so in this case, let me do one more thing. Let me stop this service. So I'm stopping the service with Control C or Command C. Now I'm going back to the same UI and I'm refreshing it. Now do you see what happened? I don't get the item back because my service is not running. What I get, console.log logs the error, but I also get, when the loading and everything is done, when I get the error, I get the error message as a network error, which I can also print and render on my page in case there is an error. Okay, so far so good. Now let's go ahead and complete the JSX part. The last piece of the puzzle is to complete the JSX part. So let's do this. I'll remove this inventory list, and here let me add some class name. We are using Tailwind CSS, so I'll be using Tailwind classes. If you are new to Tailwind, I must say that you should try it out because it's an awesome tool to do CSS with a lot of productivity. So I have added few style. That means that I'm using a flex layout. I want to arrange the things in column wise. I have given some margin around, and I have given a 40% width. That's all. Now after this, I am going to put certain conditions. So the first condition is about loading. Loading is an attribute from the state that is coming from here. So if it is loading, in that case, I'm going to do this. I'm going to show something like loading, some message. Here you can actually use any third-party loading indicator. If that is not the case, let's check for error. And if it is an error, in that case, we have a property in our state called error. We directly show that property because it has the error message. If that is also not the case, then so here we are going to print all our items. So at this stage, let us just put one ULLI tag. For now, let's keep it empty. Okay. You remember we have stopped the API services. That means API service is getting an error. So it means at least I should be able to print the error that I'm getting, right? Forget about printing the item list. I'm not getting the item list at all because I intentionally switched off the API service, and because of that, it should fail. So if I go back to the UI, see what I get. It is failing. I'm getting this network error, and the network error is in the error attribute of the state. So the network error is being printed. Great. So far so good. Now I'm going to start back my service. For that I'll do yarn start server again. The service has been started. If I come back to the screen and then refresh, I won't see anything because it is now over here. The loading is over. The error is not there. So it is in this particular condition segment where I have to write to list out the items. So here let me add a class name, and I'll add it like flex and flex call. Inside this I can add a bunch of li, right? But first of all, let me add a heading. Let me give a heading, and let's say we say like item list, something like that. And here also I'll add some class name. Let's make this text bigger with text 3XL, means bigger text. And then give some margin top and bottom. All right. Now I can start the li. This is where I'll be iterating through these items and take out one by one item and start printing them in a fashion that they look at least decent. After the heading, now I have to loop through the items. So I'll do items dot map. We use the map function usually, and it will take each of the item out, correct? And then for each of the item, I'm going to do an li over here, and I have to give a key because I'm iterating through it. I have to give a unique key. So for me, my unique key is already there in each of the item, that is ID. Because if you remember our data, each of the data is having the ID, so that is unique. So I get this as a key, and after this, my job would be inside the li kind of start printing all the information from an item. For example, its picture, name, price, quantity in a reasonable way that they are understandable into our UI. So let's do that. So for that, let me do like, so inside the paragraph, what I'm going to put here, I'm going to put the item name, item picture, item type, all this information over here. I'm going to tell something like, the banana, which I'm seeing in the item, for example, or this particular tomato. Then the tomato's picture of type vegetable cost 157 INR per kilogram, something like that. And let's start doing this thing. So first we'll bold some of these highlighted items. So I'm creating a strong tag. Inside that, I'm going to put item.name, then a space of type item.type. We can actually put a strong around this also, so that this also gets kind of highlighted, or you can put a highlight as well, or you can style it differently, whatever you prefer. For simplicity, I'll put it strong. Then I'll put cost strong, and inside this item.price, and let's put some unit as well, say INR, Indian rupees per kg. Okay, let's see if this much has done. This much is printed or there is an error. Nice. I can see something. So I see like banana of type fruits cost this one. There is a space which is required, and the picture I have not added. So let's fix that. I can actually put a picture over here. Item dot picture of type this cost, this much. So here also one space. So let's go back to the UI. So what do you see? Banana, then the image of type fruits cost 32, strawberry image. So this is beautiful. Now let me see whether I have missed any of the data to print. So I have printed everything except the quantity. I mean, quantity means how many are there in the stock, right? So I can go to my inventory list once more, and I can add one more p tag over here, and I can say available in stock, put my favorite strong, and here I can put item dot quantity. That's it, right? So let me go back to the UI. I see available in stock 200, available in stock 100, all these things. This is good. So I'm going to add class name, adding a flex column, some padding, some top and bottom margin, a background color of gray, some shade of gray, giving a border or giving a rounded corner. That is why each of the li will come. If I go to paragraph, I'm adding a class name with multiple classes, saying that, okay, give some margin up and down and make the text little bit bigger. And the p tag below over here, what I can do, I am doing the same thing, almost giving only the bottom margin and making the text little bit smaller than this one, so that there is some kind of visual differences into them. So let's go back. Awesome. So this is good, isn't it? So I have item list, banana is of type fruits, then available in stock, strawberry, chicken, lettuce, tomato, mutton, carrot, everything is great. So the application is done. Now a quick recap. We have created a server using JSON-server. For that we have installed that, and all our data that the JSON-server will be served is in this data.json file. Then we are running the server locally, and the server is serving an endpoint which says /eatables. When we make the /eatables call, a get call, we get this particular structure, data structure back as part of the API response. Then we went ahead and created our reducer. We call it as inventory reducer because we'll be using the useReducer hook for managing the complex state calculation. In this case, the state calculations are not very complex, but you might get it like more different kind of actions. For example, on these items, you have to do searching, sorting, or you have to add one new item to this or delete one. So all these things you can actually do inside this reducer by having multiple different kind of action type. Now coming to the action type, we have created a separate JavaScript file altogether to create our action types. So when the call is being made, we'll call it as progress action type. When the call is successful, it's called success. When there is an error out, we call it error. Then we have created this reducer. Reducer take two parameters. One is state and the action. State is what it's changed based on the action that is dispatched from the component or from elsewhere. We have learned from the document that the reducer should be a pure function. It means for the same input, it is supposed to return you the same output. That's the whole reason we are not doing any kind of asynchronous call or any other side effect within the reducer. We kept it outside of the reducer because we want to keep the reducer as a pure function, as pure as possible, so that it is trackable, it is trustworthy, and it is predictable. Its changes are. Now here, based on the action, we have changed the state and we have returned it. If it is progress, if it is success, and if it is error, based on that, we have taken the call. Finally, the reducer and the initial state has been exported from this file. Then we went ahead to our inventory component, the list component. There we have imported those two things and then use the useReducer hook from React, passing the reducer and the initial state to get the current value of the state and a special thing called dispatch, a dispatch function. The dispatch functions actually takes the action as an argument and then tell the reducer what to be performed and what to be done. So for example, as we are making a call using Axios and we are using Axios get method over here, we are using an use effect hook from React again to manage the side effect. At the beginning of the side effect, we are dispatching the progress state, the action type. So based on that, reducer will turn on the loading. Then we are making this call, and after the call successful, we are making a success state, actions type, then along with the data, so that reducer get the current data of it and can set the state, and for error it can set the error. At any point in time, I will be getting, my component will be getting items, loading, and error value. These are all current value. Taking this and relying on this, I am now going into my JSX and writing the JSX for the representation purpose. If it is loading, showing a loading indicator, error means error indicator, and if there are items, I am iterating through them and then showing it in the way that I think is beautiful. You can always change that the way that you would like to. I hope it makes sense, isn't it? So did you like it? If you have liked it, then why don't you like, share, and subscribe? Stay well, keep learning. We'll be back again on TapaScript with another video very soon. Thank you.